Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all those that is joining us right now. We're just going to allow a few more minutes just to make sure that everybody who wants to join have a chance to log on and join our virtual session. Thank you. We'll start momentarily.
And I wasn't able to hear you. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, something was going on with my speaker. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting anything.
No, not at all.
Are we going ahead and getting started?
Just maybe one more minute.
Sure thing.
Okay, here we go. Welcome again, everyone, for joining us in tonight's ranked choice voting information session. This is the second one that we've held. The last one was back in July. And I have with me tonight Grace Ramsey from Democracy Rising. Democracy Rising is a nonprofit organization that the city retained to help with ranked choice voting outreach and education. They've worked with many different jurisdictions on ranked choice voting, voter education, and candidate trainings. Before I turn the virtual session over to Democracy Rising, I want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. The recorded video will be available for viewing on Albany's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Albany KALB, and also on the city's ranked choice voting webpage, which is albanyca.org/RCV. If you have any questions tonight, of course, you may submit it through Q&A here. And after the session, questions can still be sent to us or emailed to cityclerk@albanyca.org after the session. Grace, it's all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, and happy to be here. So I'll give you a little bit more information about myself, and then we'll dive into tonight's presentation. So as Anne said, my name is Grace, and I'm the co-director of an organization called Democracy Rising. I have been talking about, learning about, and educating voters about ranked choice voting for about 9 years now. I've worked across the country from Maine to New Mexico to California. I was just up in Alaska recently. So I've worked in a lot of different places, and I'm really excited and honored to be able to join you all tonight. What I'm here to do is kind of take a step-by-step look at what ranked choice voting is, how it works, and hopefully answer some questions that you may have. Before I dive in, I just want to give you a couple pieces of information about kind of the things I can do in this training and this information session and the things I can't, right? So I was not a part of the ballot measure that passed ranked choice voting in Albany. So I don't have a personal stance on kind of whether that should or shouldn't have happened. So I am agnostic on the policy. I'm just here to make sure you have the information that you need. And secondly, I am not an election lawyer, nor am I an election administrator. So there may be some kind of more technical questions. I will do my best to answer the ones that I'm able to, but I never want to overstep. Your county has an excellent registrar of voters who has great information. Some of that information is in this presentation, but I just want to make sure that, to let you all know that there is some things and process kinds of things or technical things that I might not be able to answer, but I'm sure we can get you those answers if those are questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can dive in. All right, there we go. There we go. Always takes a second. All right. So as we said, today we're here to talk about Albany's elections this year and the use of ranked choice voting. So now we'll go ahead and dive right in. So how did we get here? So if you are an Albany resident, you may remember that a couple years ago, there was a ballot measure placed on the ballot in 2020 to adopt ranked choice voting in the city. That was called Measure BB. And it would adopt ranked choice voting for city council and board of education elections in the city of Albany. That measure was passed by the voters in 2020 with 73% of the vote. So that's how we adopted this system. And now this year it will be used for the first time. So on November 8th, there's a statewide election, right? You'll be electing members of Congress, your state government, as well as your local governments. And I want to make it super clear to folks that these changes and ranked choice voting will be applied to only to Albany's local elections. So every other race on your ballot this year is going to stay the same. We are just talking about local elections. So that means that this year, ranked choice voting will be used to select 2 members of the city council and will be used for 3 members of the board of education. Now, there are certain numbers of candidates in each race, so it may matter more in others or in some rather than others, but we're going to go through and explain the process for both. So what is ranked choice voting? Here in front of you, we have an example of a ranked choice voting ballot, and this is very, very similar to what your ballot will look like this year. The way I recommend using your ballot is working your way from left to right. So on the left side, you can see there is a list of candidates, candidates A through E. Those are the examples we're going to use today. So if you're a voter, you're going to start by looking at that list of candidates and deciding who's your favorite. Who do you think is the best? Who aligns with you most closely as a voter? When you find that candidate, you're going to move over to the right to that first choice column, and you're going to fill in that bubble in the first choice column next to your favorite candidate. But let's say for some reason or another, your first candidate isn't viable and can't win this election. In a ranked choice voting election, you're able to rank backup choices. So for your second choice, you'll go through that list of candidates again and say, you know, candidate C is my favorite, but if I can't have candidate C, my next choice is candidate E. So I would find candidate E on the left side, and then I would move over to that second choice column and I would fill in that second choice oval. And you keep going until you've ranked as many candidates as you would like. You'll be able to rank up to 5 choices on your ballot, but of those you could rank 1, you can rank 2, however many you would like. It is up to you as a voter. The main thing I hope you leave here understanding is that ranking a backup choice doesn't hurt your favorite candidate's chances of winning. The way I like to, when I voted in ranked choice elections, which I have gotten to before, I think of it as my first choice is the candidate I love. Maybe I have their yard sign in my yard. Maybe they're a friend of mine and I really want to support their candidacy, but it's the candidate I'm really passionate about. My second choice is the candidate I like. Third choice is the candidate I like a little bit less, and so on and so forth. So that's how I would engage with my ballot, but you are allowed to make those decisions however you would like to. So now we're going to talk about how we find our winners. In a ranked choice election, we establish our winning threshold, or the number of votes a candidate needs to be elected, based on the number of seats that we're electing. So for instance, if we were electing 1 seat in a ranked choice voting election, a candidate would need to earn more than 50% of the vote. You might be asking why? Well, more than 50%, if a candidate reaches that threshold, if they pass 50%, that's the smallest amount of votes that 1 candidate can earn, but 2 candidates can't, right? If 2 candidates have more than 50%, we have more than 100% of our votes counted, and something's gone wrong, right? So if we increase that to 2 seats, like on your city council, only 2 candidates can earn more than 1/3 of the vote. If 3 candidates earn more than a third of the vote, we have more than 100% of our votes counted. And again, something may have gone wrong. So for 2 seats, like on the city council, a candidate needs to earn more than a third of the vote, or 33.3% plus 1. But that's a little bit too complicated for me to say, so I say more than a third. Now for the Board of Education, because we're electing 3 seats, a candidate would need to earn more than a quarter of the vote, right? Because only 3 candidates can, but 4 candidates can't. So it's the fewest amount of votes that they need. So that's how we determine the number of votes a candidate needs to earn to win one of those seats. And as I said, it will be 2 seats for the city council and 3 seats for the Board of Education. So let's walk through what a ranked choice election how it works and what it would look like. So this is what we've decided as our ballot. This will be, let's say it's mine. So my favorite candidate on that list is candidate A. They're the candidate I love. They're the candidate I'd really like to see win. If I can't have candidate A, my next choice is candidate E. After that, we'll go to candidate C. After that, we'll go to candidate D. And after that, I can't see it very well on my screen, but it looks like C is coming in the last place for me. So that's how I'm going to rank my ballot. You can write in a candidate if you'd like to. We'll get into how that works in a little bit when we go through our kind of more detailed voter instructions, but you have that option on your ballot. So you are able to write in a candidate if you like. I would assume if you're writing in a candidate, they're probably your first choice, but that's totally up to you. But you have that option just like in any other election. So we've ranked our candidates. Now let's go on in the process. All right, so to start counting the votes in a ranked choice voting election, we start by only looking at voters' first choices, just first choices. Those backup choices don't matter at all. We start by just like any other election, your first choice, and we'll see where things stand. If a candidate has enough votes to earn one of those seats, in this case, we're looking at one of our city council races. If they have more than a third of the vote, they're elected and they've gotten one of the seats. Fantastic. If 2 candidates have enough votes to earn those 2 seats, great, we're all set. We have our candidates. But in a ranked choice voting election, if no candidate has enough votes to be elected, so nobody has gotten more than a third of the vote, that's where we go into our ranked choice voting process. So if no candidate has enough votes to be elected, we eliminate the candidate with the least amount of support, the candidate with the fewest votes. In this case, that would be candidate E. So let's see what that would look like. So we've eliminated candidate E. The voters who had candidate E as their first choice would instantly have their vote go to their next choice on their ballot, right? So we have those rankings. So we see all of the voters who ranked candidate E as a first choice, and we see who's next on their ballot, and that is where it goes. And we can see here that elects one of our seats. Candidate A has more than enough votes to be elected, right? They've gotten over that 30 or 33% threshold. They've earned more than enough votes. They have one of our seats. In fact, they have a lot more votes than they need to be elected, and we still don't have our second winner. This is where it gets a little interesting. So we'll go on to that process. So what happens if a candidate has more than enough votes to be elected? So if a candidate has more than enough votes to be elected, that's called a surplus, more than they need. If that happens, each of their voters will have a tiny portion of their vote count for their next choice. The reason we do this is a proportional system. So we want voters to have representation in proportion to their share of the vote. A lot of voters seem to really like candidate A. It's a really big portion of our electorate. And so they have a little bit of their vote go to their next choice because there's so many folks. So an example is, let's say candidate A here has 10% more votes than they need, right? So those voters who are with candidate A right now would have 1/10 of their vote go to their next choice. The way I like to think about this is, let's say your one vote is $1. And in this case, candidate A only needed 90 cents of your dollar to be elected because so many people wanted to help elect them. Well, you get to spend that 10 cents on your next favorite candidate. I am sure there are questions on this section. There usually are. I'm going to show a quick video after this that may explain it a little bit better than I did and give it another shot to talk through this process. And then I will pause and we can see if there are questions. This next example I'm going to show in a video is a 3-candidate election. It's going to be using a classroom deciding on 3 kinds of pizza for a pizza party. So it's a fun example, but electing 3 choices like you would be for your Board of Elections seats. So I will show that now.
Government. Welcome to Ranked Choice Voting 2.0. We first visited Mr. Perez's classroom when the students were choosing one kind of pizza to enjoy for a party to learn how ranked choice voting works. But what happens if we're able to choose more than one kind of pizza? Or in the real world, what if ranked choice voting were being used for an election where more than one person could be elected for a seat? Let's visit Mr. Perez's classroom again. But instead of only being able to select one kind of pizza for the party, students will get to choose 3 different kinds.
Lamb and pineapple? Veggie! Cheese only.
Ranking your vote is as easy as 1, 2, 3. You simply indicate your first choice, a candidate you love, your second choice, a candidate you like, and so on.
Ranked choice voting assures that community groups have representation in proportion to their share of the vote. A majority will still elect a majority of the representatives. But RCV ensures that folks who aren't in the majority are also able to have their fair share of representation. So how do we determine who wins and who loses when there are multiple seats to fill? This is determined by the winning threshold, the percentage of votes needed for a candidate to be elected. When electing one winner, a candidate needs to earn more than half of the vote, 50% plus 1, to reach a majority. For 2 winners, it's a third of the vote plus 1 to be elected. And for 3 winners, it's a quarter, 25% plus 1 to be elected. For us to select 3 pizzas, each selection will need to get more than 25% of the vote. And the votes are in. Pepperoni pizza was overwhelmingly chosen with 39% of the vote, over the required 25% threshold. If a voter's first choice candidate is elected and has a surplus of votes that they needed to win, that voter has a portion of their vote count for the next person ranked on their ballot. So each voter who had pepperoni as their first choice would have a portion of that vote go to their second choice. 18 of pepperoni voters ranked cheese pizzas at their second choice. So when a portion of those votes go to cheese, it pushes cheese over the threshold and is selected. Now we need to find our third winner. Since no other candidate has reached the threshold, we eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes. Voters who selected combo have their vote instantly go to their next choice. Now, veggie pizza is over the threshold, and we have chosen all 3 pizzas.
We have our winners, pepperoni, cheese, and veggie pizza.
Ranked choice voting is like this classroom's pizza party. It allows you to vote your conscience without having to worry about wasting your vote or losing your voice, giving voters more choice and more power. Ranked choice.
All right, we'll stop there. And I will stop sharing for just a moment so we can stop and see if there's any questions.
We do. The first one
It's a great question. Yes.
is a great question.
I think I'm going to answer it in like 2 slides. So maybe we'll just dive right into the frequently asked questions part of our presentation. And if I don't answer it, I promise I will come right back. Does that work? I'm going to hope so. And I'm going to dive right in. All right. We're going to go back to sharing my screen, and I should answer your question in just a moment. The Zoom screen's in the way, so I can't see. All right. If technology isn't being mean to me, I wouldn't know what to do. So here we are. All right. So can you see my whole screen, or is the Zoom screen in the way at all, Anne?
No, I can see your whole screen.
Lovely. Then I have a bit of the Q&A is a bit in the way, but we'll be fine. All right. So how many candidates do I have to rank, and do I have to use all of my rankings? So this is the most common question we get. We're going to get into a couple others, and I think I'll answer the question in the Q&A. But the answer is you can rank up to 5 candidates. You can rank as many of or as few of those 5 candidates as you'd like. The couple things we want to make sure that you know is that second, third, et cetera, those choices are backups in case your favorite candidate can't win. And you don't have to rank backup candidates if you don't want to. So this is totally up to the voter. And it is totally your choice whether you want to rank those candidates. We just want to make sure you know you have the ability to, if you'd like. But if you don't want to, we're not going to make you. All right, so we have a couple examples of things that we've seen voters very, very rarely do on their ballots, but it could happen. And we want to make sure to talk through it with you just in case so that you're fully informed on election day. So this voter really, really likes candidate B, right? Candidate B is their favorite. They want to do everything they can to elect candidate B. And in fact, they've ranked candidate B for all of their choices on their ballot. So when this happens, I think sometimes voters may think that ranking the same candidate for all of their choices somehow supercharges their vote for that candidate. Or maybe if you rank candidate B 5 times, you give them 5 votes. And I want to dispel that today. So ranking candidate B for all of your choices is the same thing as ranking candidate B for your first choice and leaving the rest blank. We're going to talk through why that is. Let's say that let's say that we're at a restaurant and you're ordering something on the menu, right? You came in, you're ordering your lunch, let's say, and you say, I'd like to have a hamburger. And your server says, I'm so sorry, we don't have hamburgers today. That's not going to be possible. What else can I get you? And you say, I will have the hamburger. And they say, I'm so sorry, we don't have hamburgers. That's kind of what this ballot is doing, right? If candidate B were to be eliminated and we went back to try and see what your next choice was on your ballot, you won't have one because you ranked the same candidate again, right? So when we're going to see if candidate B is your first choice, what's your next choice? We won't have another option. There won't be somewhere for your ballot to go. The way I think about it is a ranked choice voting ballot is going to work as hard as possible to make sure that your voice is heard in this election. But if you've ranked the same candidate for all of your choices and that candidate's eliminated, your ballot has worked as hard for you as it possibly can, and it just doesn't have any more to give because you haven't ranked those backup choices. So in this case, if candidate B were eliminated, your vote would be exhausted. If you cast your vote this way, at least in my experience, what would happen if you're voting in person is that you would get an error message and it would say, on this race, you made this decision. Is that something that you would like to do? And if so, you can override that message and say, yes, this is how I'd like to cast my ballot. This ballot will count for candidate B. Or you can say, no, that's not what I meant to do. And you can have another ballot so that you can do it correctly if that wasn't your intention. But we always want to make sure that even though this vote will count for candidate B, we want to make sure you know why you're ranking those bubbles and why you're making those decisions and that you weren't thinking that you were doing something else when you rank your ballot this way. All right, this is probably the most common question I get altogether, which is, does it hurt my favorite candidate to rank backup choices? Right? If I have a second or a third choice, does that hurt my favorite candidate's chances? And the answer there is no. Your second choice or any of your kind of subsequent choices will only be looked at if that first choice candidate is either out of the race altogether, they were eliminated, or if they're already elected, right? So if they already were elected and they have a surplus and you have a second choice, that would come into play if that surplus is going somewhere else when that candidate's performed very well. And your second choice will only matter. The other situation is if your first choice is out of the race altogether. So they are just backups. Your vote will do everything it can to elect your favorite candidate as long as they're still in the race. And then I think this answers the other question that we had in the Q&A. I hope it does. But this voter really liked a lot of the candidates. I see another question there. We'll get to that in just a moment. So this voter really liked all of the candidates. They really felt, everybody was great. And unfortunately in this system, we are asking you to play a bit of favorites. We are asking you to have just one first choice, one second choice, one third choice, and so on. The job of your election administrators is to make sure that your voice is heard in the way that you meant for it to be. And their job is not to guess what you meant in any situation. And so if a voter fills out their ballot this way, we can't tear it into four or five different pieces and give a little piece out to each candidate, right? You have that one vote, it needs to count for one candidate. And so because election administrators can't guess what this voter's intent was, for this race, this ballot would be spoiled. My understanding is if you filled out every other, election on your ballot correctly, that it would just be this race where it wouldn't count, but this is an error and it's one that we want to avoid. So if I know that in the past, if you're electing 2 seats, sometimes you select 2 candidates, but we want you to rank 1 first choice, 1 second choice, 1 third choice, and so on.
If I can jump in for a quick second. So this is pretty much exactly like you mentioned how our ballot will look like. If you look at the instruction in the center of the ballot, this one's blocked a little bit, but it's basically fill no more than 1 oval per candidate per column. In other words, you should only have 1 oval filled in each row and in each column.
Absolutely. I saw a question in the chat about whether or not this will be done by hand. My understanding is that it will not be done by hand. The registrar of voters in your county has voting equipment that is able to count this very quickly using software. These elections can be counted by hand. That is possible, but it would take a really long time. So what tends to happen is that software is used to count these elections, and then we check to make sure that everything was correct afterwards. But my understanding is this election will not be counted by hand, and you'll use the equipment that the county has to run these elections. And I'm assuming that is your understanding as well?
Correct.
Great. All right.
There's another question.
Sure.
Still not sure I understand the third step. I'm not quite sure what the third step is. Let me allow her to maybe speak up.
Sure.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, I'm beginning to understand what happens, if there's greater, in the case you're using for school board, where we're going to have 3 candidates positions. I sort of understand that if one person gets greater than 33%, that person is already electable.
Mm-hmm.
But I get confused. Okay, and then on this, but if they have extra points, then it gets distributed to the second choice. There's those people's second choice.
Yeah.
Well, then, so that might bring the second person over. I suppose it could take 2 people over, but I guess it's the next step I didn't understand when you used your example of candidates. It's how are in the first case, when you went to the second choice person, you eliminated the 5th candidate, and then when you go to the third person, you eliminate the 4th candidate, and then and then once again, any excess is distributed to the third.
Okay. I think I hear where your question is, and I'm gonna try to answer it. So basically, when we count up our votes, if we don't have our winners, right? If on first choice, if we're talking about the school board, so we'll say there's 3 seats. If we don't have our winners right away, right? Or if we have 1 or anything like that, the 2 things that can happen is 1, the first scenario is a candidate has more votes than they need. And that's what we handle first. Is if a candidate has more votes than they need, then however far they go over, so the example I used was if they have 10% more votes than they need, each of those voters will get a portion of their vote to go to their next choice. So we level that out. So they have enough votes to be elected, but all of those people have as much representation as their share of the voters. So that's one scenario, is a candidate has more votes than they need, and we level that out. The other scenario then is that no candidate has enough votes to earn either those additional seats or any of them. But if we don't have enough, if no one has enough to get a seat, then we eliminate the candidate in last place. So if we eliminate the candidate in last place, those voters have their vote instantly go to their next choice. So if on this ballot, candidate D was my first choice and they were in last place, my vote would instantly go to my next choice. And because I didn't rank my ballot like this, where I ranked all the candidates as the same, we would know where that vote would go. So those are the 2 scenarios, is a candidate has more votes than they need and we level it out. or no one has enough votes for a seat, and then we eliminate that candidate in last place. And those two processes keep going until we fill all 3 seats. Oh, I don't see Deborah anymore, so I'm hoping that helps. And we'll make all of these, we'll make that video available. We'll make all of that available so that folks can look at it again. I know as a new concept, it can be tough.
One thing that may help is I understand everyone's trying to understand how the votes are counted, but what is very, very important here is just to make sure you mark the ballot correctly, that you mark your favorite candidate as your first choice and your second choice and third choice and so on. And we can leave the tabulation and the calculation to the registrar of voter office.
Yes, it is good to trust the professionals with that one, but it can be a little daunting at first, but yes, you're totally right. And your job as the voter is to rank that ballot however you would like to, 1 first choice, 1 second choice, and so on. Now we're going to get into a little bit of kind of the more practical side of things, of really making sure that you cast your vote correctly and you mark your ballot correctly. There's a couple ways that folks may be marking their ballot, so we're going to go through both of them. So this is if you're using a paper ballot, whether that is absentee or early voting or on election day at a polling site, however you are casting that paper ballot. Some of those key things to remember is that you're only going to use black or blue ink on that ballot. You are not going to use any of those fun colors, even though they are fun. We are going to keep it in the black and blue family for that ink. When you are voting, you want to completely fill in the oval to the right of the candidate you're voting for, or their yes or a yes or no measure. You can see a few examples of that here. We threw in that ranked choice over there on the left. So you're going to completely fill in the oval to the right of your first choice in the first choice column, to the right of your second choice in that second choice column, and so on. In those races up the ballot where you're voting for either your federal representatives or your state government, you're going to fill in that one oval just to the right. And on that ballot measure, you're going to fill in your yes or no, but you want to completely fill in that oval. As I said before, you have the ability to vote for write-in candidates if you'd like. You want to print their name and you want to fill in the oval that next to them. If that's ranked choice, you'll have to decide whether that write-in is your first choice or any other of those choices up to 5 on your ballot. And then a couple key things. If you make a mistake, don't try to correct it. It's totally fine to make mistakes. You will not be punished for making a mistake in any way. But if you do make a mistake, you want to put that ballot back inside the secrecy sleeve, return it to an election worker, and ask for a replacement, right? We don't want to have to guess what someone meant if they crossed something out or anything like that. We want to make sure we absolutely know what you meant on your ballot. So if you accidentally make a mistake, again, totally fine. Place that back in the secrecy sleeve, take it to an election worker, and ask for a replacement. I have done this before. I was a little intimidated when I did it, but I was really relieved when I got that replacement ballot, filled it out, and knew that I'd filled it out correctly and felt really excited to cast that ballot. So, and then you're going to place that ballot inside the secrecy sleeve. You're going to detach the ballot card stubs, and then you're going to return that and your pen to your election workers. So that process, I hope you're familiar with it. That's largely if you're in person. Obviously, if you're voting absentee, that process is slightly different. It will involve either dropping off your ballot or mailing it back. But we really want to make sure when you're filling it out that you're doing so correctly, so we make sure that we can count your vote. The other way you may be voting is if you need to, in the event, there are touch screens available in polling places so that you can cast your vote if for some reason a paper ballot isn't going to work for you. So if you're doing that, that session is going to be activated by an election worker on a separate machine. So they will help you get that set up. You'll be able to adjust the size of the text, the view of the screen, and there are some other options for how you can do that. And when you're using that touch screen, it'll be at the top. And you're also able to navigate your ballot. There'll be a next or previous button. So if you finish that race at the top of the ballot and you want to move on to the next one, you can hit next. If you want to go back and make sure that you did exactly what you meant to do, you can hit back. So there are a number of ways that you can navigate your ballot on that touch screen. And then to vote for a candidate, you're going to press, there's a checkbox next to the right of their name. So it's very similar to the paper ballot that instead of filling in an oval, you're going to press down and check that box. We'll get into how that works in ranked choice voting in just a second. It's very similar. It's just obviously you're able to rank your choices. And then to vote for a write-in candidate, like we said, you're able to vote for write-in candidates. There is a checkbox that says write-in option, and you're able to type the name of the write-in candidate that you would like to vote for, and you will press accept to complete that. You will also have the ability to mark that checkbox with a yes or a no on any ballot measures. And when you're finished, you'll be able to print your ballot. So there's a button that says print ballot. When you've done everything, you've gone over it, you've made sure that that's everything you need to do, you will hit print ballot. Once that ballot is printed, very similarly, you will place that inside your secrecy sleeve and take it to, there is a turquoise trolley. That is where those ballots will be corrected. Same thing as before. If you make a mistake, do not try to correct it. Return it to an election worker and they can activate another session on that touch screen. Again, we really want to make sure that you're able to cast your vote exactly as you intended to. And so we want to make sure that that is as straightforward as possible. So no problems if you make a mistake. There is no shame in that. You take it back to an election worker and they can help you start another session. When the ballot card is inside the secrecy sleeve, again, you will take it and put it into that turquoise trolley, and then you will return those materials to an election worker. So that's how it's going to work on a touch screen if you are a voter that requires a touch screen. So for ranked choice voting, it's largely the same, but we want to make sure to go over it. So if you are voting with a touch screen, you are able to select one candidate for each ranking. So similar to how it would be in any other election, you vote for your first choice by pressing the checkbox to the right, and then the number 1 will appear next to their name. So you'll know that they're your first choice because you'll see that number 1. For your second choice, you'll press it for your next candidate in that list, and you'll see a number 2 appear beside their name, and then 3, and so on. You can change your ranking if you accidentally pressed the checkbox on a candidate you didn't intend to. You just uncheck that box next to that candidate, and you can reselect them as you'd like to. So you are able to go through that process. And if for some reason, you meant to hit somebody as a second choice and accidentally hit someone else, you can go back and fix that. And all of that is before you print your ballot. This is all during one session. So you just go through and click the check mark in order that you like those candidates: first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. And then the process is the same. You would hit print ballot, you would put that in the secrecy sleeve, and then you would take it to the turquoise trolley. So that's how ranked choice voting will work on a touch screen. Let's see what we have next. We do have a short video that shows this process. It's just like 25 seconds. So we will show that so you can see what it would look like. It's a little far away, but it gives a good indication of what a touch screen session would look like with ranked choice voting. So there we see they were able to rank those candidates in order of choice. There was a change that they wanted to make, so they were able to hit that button and change the ranking, and now they have it in the order that they would like. So that is how it would work on a touchscreen machine if you are a voter that uses one. Ooh, starting again, no. All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing there. And if there are additional questions, I'm happy to ask them. You have all the time you need. I'm happy to review things if we'd like to review things, but happy to answer questions. Or if folks don't have too many, happy to let us all go into our evenings a little earlier. And if there are questions that we get over email or anything like that, we'll make sure to publicize those answers. So I see one thing in the Q&A. All right, we have a hypothetical. I'm going to read through it quick and then I will try to answer it.
I'll read it out loud for
Okay.
public to hear it too.
Sure.
Suppose a candidate needs 10 votes to be elected on the second round and gets 20 on the second round and now has a surplus of 10 votes. These are second choice votes. Do you look at all the new votes and see who their third choices were? Or if you did that, you would have now 20 votes to allocate, but you only need to reallocate 10 votes. How is this done? Is each vote counted as half a vote?
Yeah. So if a candidate needs 10 votes to be elected and they get 20 votes, they have twice the number of votes they need to be elected, right? So twice the number of voters that they needed voted for them. So that's our surplus, right? They went 10 votes over the 10 votes they needed. So it would be each of those voters who voted for that candidate would have half of their vote go to their next choice because they had twice the number of votes that they need. So that means it's a huge, if it takes 10 votes to win, that's a huge part of our electorate that liked that candidate. And so they would have half of those votes count for their next choice. So you have that correct. Obviously, we're going to have a lot more than 10 votes needed to win in these elections. So with a fewer number of voters, that's a good way to kind of go through those examples. But that is exactly how it would work. So like if a candidate needed 25% plus one to be elected and they got 50% of the vote, that's a huge percentage of the electorate that supported them. And if this is Board of Education where you need 25% to win a seat, that's half of the electorate with one person. That's a huge portion. And if we want everyone to have representation that's proportional to their strength in the electorate, then those voters would get a portion of their vote to go to their next choice.
Yes, and if anyone has question and prefer not to type the question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. We'll find time to allow you to speak and ask your question. Okay. I think we can go to the next.
So the next section I have, Anne, is kind of how I talk about these things. So I'm happy to go into that if you'd like to, just if folks are going to leave here and have conversations. Otherwise, yeah, we'll do a little bit of that. It's just a couple slides. So I'll make those recommendations. And then if we have more questions, we'll talk through them. And if not, we'll all go on into our evenings and have a lovely one. So the next part I'm going to talk about is just if you're having conversations with your friends, with your neighbors, with folks in the community about how this works, I have some recommendations about how to talk about it. And so we'll share those with you all in case you want to have those conversations with your neighbors. All right. So I know in my experience, when I've worked in places where ranked choice voting is new, there's a pretty strong chance, almost a certainty, that some voters aren't going to know about it. That's expected. That's absolutely fine. That's why we have meetings like this. That's why your city is doing such an excellent job of providing you educational resources. So we anticipate that and we're doing everything we can, but maybe you want to help out as well and educate your neighbors. Some people are going to love it and some people are going to hate it. That is totally fine as well. It's a change that can be difficult. And so it's not our job when we're talking about the election we have upcoming to necessarily sway people on how they feel about it. We just want to make sure that they are ready to rank their vote in November if we're having that conversation. So here are some tips that I have for when you're talking to a friend or a neighbor about how to vote. So my key rules are: don't get bogged down in the theoretical, avoid jargon, keep it simple, bring it back to voters and values, and remind people we do this all the time. I'm going to talk about those one by one. So not getting bogged down in the theoretical. A lot of times when something like this is new, we like to think about how it would have affected a past election or a future election or all kinds of things. And that can be fun, but if we're just making sure that folks know how to vote, we want to stay focused on this election. So sometimes if somebody says, oh, in 2024, if these people run for this office, and if this happens, and if this happens, what would ranked choice voting do? And the answer is we don't have definite answers, right? We know about this election and we know how candidates are running their race in this election. And sometimes we know the reasons that folks wanted to pass these kinds of reforms. But if you're not comfortable having that conversation, I'd avoid going into kind of that rabbit hole of what could happen in certain scenarios. We want to make sure voters know what their ballot is going to look like and how to use those rankings. The next one is avoiding jargon. I know for myself, I'm not a math person. When people use math terms with me, I find it really intimidating. So hopefully throughout this presentation, you didn't hear me use too many of them. If I did, I'm sorry, because I don't like doing that. But you might hear some terms about this, or you may have learned some terms about this that are often how election administrators talk about it. And sometimes that can feel a little daunting for folks. So an example that you may have heard is sometimes people say, if your first choice candidate is eliminated, your vote is reallocated to your second choice. Now that may not be too math heavy, but reallocated is not a word I was very familiar with before I was working on ranked choice voting and talking about these elections. So I try to say instead, if your first choice is eliminated, your vote will go to your next choice on your ballot, right? So trying to shorten that. Keeping it simple. I personally, if I'm having conversations with just a friend or a neighbor or someone about this, I tend to just keep it to what voters' job is, which is ranking their ballot, right? That is our job as voters. That's what we want to make sure that we do or understand. With folks who are, ready to talk about it a little further and talk about how those votes are counted and all of those things, I am more than willing to do so. But largely our job as voters is to determine who our first choices, second choices, third choices, and so on. So if you're having those conversations, I recommend using videos like the ones we shared today that can kind of explain the process so that you don't have to go as in the weeds if you don't feel comfortable. Bringing it back to voters and their values. So one thing I want to highlight about today is I so appreciate all of you joining because it means you're engaged and it means you care about your community and you really want to see these elections go well. And I think that's so admirable. And I'm so glad you took the time out to join me. But it shows that we share some values, right? We value people having their voice heard in their elections. We value participation in our democracy, things like that. So sometimes the change itself can feel like what's on the ballot, but at the end of the day, what's on the ballot is we are electing people to represent us at our city government. And so bringing it back to what really matters here, the mechanism is important, how we vote is important, but making sure people remember that we are voting for things and it's important to participate in that process. And so educating voters is to make sure they can do that most effectively. The last thing I'll highlight is that we actually think this way all the time. We think in a ranked choice way all the time. We just don't always think of it that way. So I gave that example about going out to lunch when I was talking about ranking the same candidate for all of your choices. But think about that in another context. If we were all going to go and grab some dinner after this presentation, we'd want to find a place that we could all enjoy. So maybe we say, let's go to the pizza place, but turns out the pizza place is closed. Well, we got to figure out what works next, right? That's a ranked choice decision right there. If we couldn't have our favorite, we have to figure out our next choice. I feel like parents especially are aware of this thought process a lot. If you're trying to make decisions with your family and, you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your day and maybe you wanted to go to the park, but it's raining, you're going to figure out what your next choice is for that process. The last example I'll give is my nephew is about to go off to college next year, and he's trying to figure out what option he'd like to go with. He could go to a 4-year program, he could go to a 2-year vocational school, or he could join the military if he'd like, right? Those are 3 options for him. His ideal is maybe going to a 4-year program that's as far away from his parents as he can, but maybe that's not going to work out for him, right? So he's going to find what his perfect choice is for after school. If he can't have that, he'll go for the next best option and so on and so forth in his choices. So wherever this shows up in your life, if I plant this seed, you might find it shows up more often than you think. And so reassuring folks that even though this might be new to our politics, it's not new to our minds, and that you should be confident in your ability to do this because you already do. So with that, it went backwards. There we go. I don't know what's going on with the slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you. That's the end of my presentation. But I hope it was helpful for folks, and I'm happy to hang out and answer any other questions that folks have.
Right. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask the question. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us and remind you that the recording of this video, along with the presentation slide, will be available on the city's website, www.albanyca.org/RCV. And the video, of course, will be available on the city's YouTube channel, youtube.com/Albany KALB. And if you have any questions after this, or if you think of a question, 2 days later, a week later, please feel free to email city clerk at albanyca.org or call the City Hall 510-528-5710. We'll do our best to answer all those questions. And if you have friends, neighbors, someone walking down the street and just ask you, hey, do you know about ranked choice voting? Please refer them to our city website. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.